We tend to think of history as this story written by great leaders or maybe driven by big ideologies or even advanced by technology. But what if the most powerful force shaping our world isn't a person or an idea, but the very ground beneath our feet? Today, we're diving into the incredible argument from Tim Marshall's Prisoners of Geography, that mountains, rivers, and seas are the silent dictators of global politics.
This quote, wow, it just perfectly frames a modern crisis in these timeless geographical terms. It cuts right to the heart of what we're talking about today. The struggle over Ukraine isn't just about politics or personality, it's about the strategic nightmare of a vast, flat, and terrifyingly open plain. So let's unpack what that really means for a nation's destiny.
And that gets us to the key idea for this whole thing: geopolitics. This is the lens we'll be using. It's the idea that a country's grand strategy isn't just cooked up in a meeting room. It's fundamentally dictated by its physical location. Things like, do you have access to a warm water port? Are you protected by mountains, or are you vulnerable because of a flat, open border? These are the factors that truly define a nation's power and its fears.
All right, so let's dive into the first big principle here: the unchanging map. Think about it. Leaders change, ideologies rise and fall, technology races forward. But the mountains, they don't move. The rivers don't reroute themselves. The fundamental geography of a nation is a constant, and it acts as this permanent constraint on any leader's ambition. This really gets to the heart of it. Every leader, from an ancient emperor mapping out his domain to a modern president looking at a digital globe, inherits a physical reality. They just can't move the mountains or change the flow of the rivers. In a very, very real sense, they're prisoners of the landscape, forced to play the strategic hand that geography deals them.
Okay, so to really see how this works, let's look at our first major case study, Russia. If you want to understand centuries of Russian foreign policy, I'm talking from the Tsars all the way to today, you have to start with its geography. And that geography can be summed up in two words: the curse of flatland.
Just look at this map. To the west, there are no big mountains, no major rivers to act as a barrier. The North European plain is basically a flat, open highway leading straight to Moscow. It's the route the Poles took, it's the route Napoleon took, and it's the route Hitler took. This repeated history of invasion has been absolutely seared into the Russian psyche for centuries.
And that deep-seated vulnerability? Well, it explains a Russian strategy that has been remarkably consistent for 500 years. If you don't have natural barriers to protect you, what's the alternative? You push outwards. You expand to create a strategic depth, a massive buffer of land that any invading army has to struggle across. This single imperative explains so much of Russia's history.
All right, now let's flip the script completely and look at a total geographical contrast. If Russia suffers from the curse of flatland, the United States, well, it enjoys the blessing of isolation. Its geography is, you could argue, the greatest strategic gift any nation has ever received.
I mean, look at this comparison. The difference is just staggering. On one side, you have Russia, constantly watching its flat, open border. And on the other, America, protected by two enormous moats, the Atlantic and the Pacific. This unbelievable security has allowed the U.S. to develop and prosper, totally free from the kind of existential threats that have defined Russian history.
And this superpower status wasn't an accident. Oh no. It was this deliberate three-step geopolitical project. First, as you can see, they secured the resource-rich heartland with a Louisiana Purchase. Step 2, they controlled the approaches by taking Florida and Texas, which prevented European powers from getting a foothold. And finally, Step 3, they built a global navy to rule the very oceans that guaranteed their security.
So we've seen how geography can be a blessing, but what happens when you completely ignore it? In Africa and the Middle East, we see the tragic consequences of what Tim Marshall calls the scars of ink. Borders drawn with a ruler on a map, with zero regard for the mountains, rivers, or people on the ground.
And this right here, this is the root of so much of the conflict we see today. European colonial powers, sitting in distant conference rooms, just drew straight lines on maps of Africa and the Middle East. These artificial lines sliced right through ancient tribal lands, they forced rival ethnic groups into the same state, and they completely ignored natural boundaries like mountain ranges.
And the results? Well, they've been absolutely catastrophic. These artificial borders created inherently unstable nations, and that led to decades of civil war and ethnic violence. The legacy is still being felt today, as some groups have tried to violently erase these colonial lines and redraw the map in blood.
Okay, so if geography has shaped our past, where is it taking us next?
As we look to the future, two new frontiers of geopolitical competition are really coming into focus: the contested seas around China and the rapidly melting ice of the Arctic. So these two maps, they really tell the story of what's coming next. You've got the South China Sea on one side and the High North on the other. One is a story of an old power trying to break out of its geographic prison, and the other is a race to claim a brand new frontier that's opening up for the first time in human history. You see, for all its economic might, China is geographically contained. It's ringed by what's called the First Island Chain, a series of islands from Japan down to the Philippines, and most of them are allied with the United States. For Beijing to become a true global naval power, it feels it has to break through this barrier to get free access to the Pacific. And that, right there, is the core driver of tension in the South China Sea.
Meanwhile, way up at the top of our planet, climate change is creating an entirely new ocean. The opening of the Arctic isn't just an environmental story, it's a huge geopolitical one. It means access to vast, untapped reserves of oil and gas, and new, faster shipping routes. This is exactly why Russia, America, Canada, and others are already scrambling to stake their claims in this new, great game on ice.
So you see, it all comes back to this one really humbling core message. Despite all our technology and our complex ideas, we are still profoundly shaped by the physical realities of our planet. Nature, in so many ways, still holds the trump cards.
So I want to leave you with a question to think about. What about your own country? Is its story one of oceanic protection? Is it defined by a major river? Is it constrained by mountains, or maybe left vulnerable by open plains? How has the simple, unchanging map beneath your feet shaped your nation's history, its culture, and ultimately its destiny? The answer, as we've seen, is often way more powerful than we realize.